Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Yud Gimel. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with a quick review of what we did in the previous class. So if we see that we had a Mishnah, and the Mishnah seems to imply, or the Mishnah says that if you have a pigul thought, we're talking about pigul, you have a thought that you're going to eat less than a requisite amount and burn less than a requisite amount, the korban is not disqualified because eating and burning don't go together, to which the Gemara jumped to a conclusion that this seems to mean burning and eating, the actions don't go together, but if it's both thoughts about eating, even if you're mixing things that are normally eaten and burned, it would combine. To which the Gemara said, but that contradicted our previous Mishnah. If you remember, the previous Mishnah said, if you have a thought to eat something that normally is eaten or to burn something that's normally burned, but not to eat something that's normally burned or burn something that's normally eaten, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't disqualify. Okay, they wouldn't combine. Or it wouldn't work at all, and therefore, obviously, they wouldn't combine. So the conclusion from the previous Mishnah would be if it's to eat and to eat two different thoughts, each one less than a requisite amount of, I'm going to eat the komets, let's say, which is normally burnt, and I'm going to eat less than a kazayit, and less than a kazayit of the remainder, which is actually normally eaten, those would not combine. But it seems like our Mishnah would say only to eat and to burn wouldn't combine, but to eat and to eat would. So the first answer was Rabbi Yirmia that just said, our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, who actually holds, and we saw the Mishnah where he actually says that they actually do combine. Then we jump to Abaye. Now Abaye says, I'm going to explain this Mishnah also according to the rabbis. And how does he do that? Well, he's going to start by saying, I disagree with the inference. Okay? Don't say, lo tema hala echol v'le'echol davar she'ein darko le'echol. Okay, we're going to start with Abaye inside. Okay? Don't say, okay, about 6 lines from the bottom. Don't say hala echol v'le'echol davar she'ein darko le'echol. That's not the inference to make. Ela ema, what you should say is this. Hala echol v'le'echol davar she'darko le'echol. Like, mix a chatzi zayit shirayim with a chatzi zayit shirayim, but what are we going to mix actually? We're going to mix them. We're going to combine. Okay, obviously you could take half kazayit of remainder and half kazayit of remainder, and that adds up to a whole kazayit, and it's a problem. But we're going to combine a chutz lizmano thought with a chutz limkomo thought. One is you're going to eat a half a kazayit outside the right time, and one is you're going to eat it outside the right place, and that's going to combine to disqualify. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, my kamashmalan, what is that teaching you? We also saw that in the Mishnah before, where it said, kechatzi zayit bachutz, ukechatzi zayit lemachal. Exactly that. A half a gazayit outside and a half a gazayit tomorrow. Or kechatzi zayit lemachal, or kechatzi zayit bachutz. Or half a gazayit outside and half a gazayit, tomorrow and half a gazayit outside, right? Doesn't matter the order. It's pasul ve'en bo karet. So what do you see here? It can't be that, because that's said explicitly in the previous Mishnah. So we're going to now stick with Abaye, who's going to try to explain how we can explain this according to the position of the rabbis, who generally say you can't combine a thought of eating and burning. And we're going to say, oh, right. So now we're going to try to figure out what is the proper inference from this Mishnah, or really what is our Mishnah talking about. So he tried to change the inference to all being things that are eaten, but just combining two different, either outside of time or outside of place together. That didn't work. So the Gemara is going to continue to say, right? And then the Gemara says, if that's the case, now getting to the top of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Hatu Lamali, then what do we need this for? Because we already have the previous Mishnah. So now we're going to try another attempt, and that we're going to reject as well. And then we're going to have a third attempt, which we'll reject, but then get it back. Okay? So here's our second attempt to understand. Within Abaye, who says, I can explain the Mishnah according to the rabbis, how can we explain it? Maybe it's trying to tell you we want to combine something that can't be eaten and something that can be eaten. Now, this is what we said before, the beginning, so hold off. Okay, we're going to combine. The thought was I'm going to eat half a zayit of shirayim in the wrong time. And I also have a thought I'm going to eat half a zayit of the komets outside the right time. Same time, right outside of time. And kamash malan de mitzaref. And maybe the Mishnah is telling us they do combine. But, okay, now this already we kind of rejected, but we're suggesting it anyway. But the Gemara says there's some problems with the girsa here, okay? Because, first of all, this is a little bit of a problematic question in the first place, because we already rejected this and says the other Mishnah says it, and that's what the Gemara is going to say, which is the previous Mishnah, right? Dereisha Shamat mina kechatzi zayit. Okay, now you have to change the girsa. But the point being, meresha shmat mina. We already learned it from the resha. Where is that? Right? We already learned from the resha that they don't combine. In other words, you can't say that this Mishnah is coming to tell you, oh, you could combine a half a kazayit of shirayim and a half kazayit of a kometz. When the kometz burnt, the shirayim is eaten, and you're only talking about eating. I'm going to eat this and I'm going to eat that, and they combine, because that already in the previous Mishnah is clear that they don't, because there is no pigul thought. There is no pigul thought for eating something that normally is burnt. So it can't be that. Okay, like I said, it's a bit of a difficult suggestion, because we already started in the beginning and said that can't possibly be. So that's why there's different versions. Each version is somewhat problematic. Okay, third option. And here we're going to finally have our answer, even though we're going to first reject it. Now I'm going to read what's in parentheses, even though it clearly is some added text, which is coming just to explain, but at least it doesn't contradict our version, which is, if it's le'echol ulahaktir, maybe it's to eat and to burn. Tihi gufa kamashma. In other words, until now we kept saying this Mishnah is coming to infer something. It's not coming to infer anything. Maybe it's just coming to tell us that you can't combine a thought about eating and a thought about burning. That's what it means. He gufa kamashma. It's coming to teach us about itself. Well, miduka dereisha shmat mina. But again, you can infer that from the previous Mishnah. Why? Well, logic would state like this. If you can't have a thought about combining, right? The previous Mishnah said you can't have a thought about eating something that's not normally eaten, which means obviously you can't combine something to eat shirayim, which is eaten, combine it with to eat something that's normally burnt, right? So if to eat and to eat, davar she'enu darko le'echol, amart lo mitztaref, le'echolu laktir mabaya. Now here we're going to show why this is totally unnecessary. Because if you can't combine to eat and to eat something that's not normally eaten, shirayim and kometz, right, those two things don't combine even if you're in the language of eating, for sure you can't combine a thought about eating and a thought about burning. Wouldn't that be obvious? To which the Gemara is going to say, no, actually not. Because, and with this we'll end the section and the chapter, because now they say, you actually we do need to tell you that. In other words, from the previous Mishnah, it said pigul is only a thought about eating something that's normally eaten, burning something that's normally burned. However, maybe you still can combine to eat a half a zayit and to burn a half a zayit. Why? Because you needed us to teach you that. Because you obviously can't combine eating the shirayim, which is normally eaten, and eating the kometz, which is normally burnt, because one is normally burned and not eaten. So that's why they don't combine. And that's right. They're the low-key orcha kamachashiv. That's not the normal way to do it. You don't eat the shirayim, you burn them. Aval hacha. De b'haiki orcha kamachashiv, u'b'haiki orcha kamachashiv, emalitztaref. Kamash malan. But by us, you might have said, wait a minute. Maybe a thought of eating what normally is eaten and burning what's normally burning. Now, eating and burning are two different actions, but each one is relating to, I'm going to eat the shirayim tomorrow, and I'm going to burn the kometz tomorrow. Both are thoughts of doing the right thing with the, obviously, in a wrong manner. I'm going to eat the stuff that's eaten, burn the stuff that's burned tomorrow, which is not allowed. But maybe they would combine because each is done in the way it's supposed to be done. Kamash malan, that's why the Mishnah has to come and tell us that it's not the case. They don't combine, even though you might have thought so. So that's the whole explanation here as to what this is coming for, which it means that you can explain this according to the rabbis, because there is no inference like we thought. We thought there was an inference that contradicts the rabbi's position, but no. So we're left with two explanations. Either it's Rabbi Eliezer, and it really does conflict with the rabbis, and we really do assume that that assumption is true, which is to eat and to eat would actually combine, even though you're combining one thing that's eaten and one thing that's burned. According to Abaye, no, that's not the case. We don't have to explain it that way. You could explain the Mishnah according to the rabbis, and in this manner that we just did, which is it's not coming for any inference, because really we rejected all those possibilities of what the inference could be. It's really coming for itself. And with that, Hadran alach kol Menachot, Zalto for finishing the first chapter of Menachot. Now we're going to start with the second chapter. And as we've been seeing until now, this is all, again, continuing to be very parallel to Zvachim. Hakometz et hamincha le'echol shiareha, o lahaktir kumtza lemachar. So you take a kometz from the mincha to eat the shirayim, or to burn the kometz tomorrow. Okay? Modet Rabbi Yosi b'zeh shu pigul v'chayvim alav karet. Okay, this is a very strange line because there's really no point to saying this in the Mishnah because it's quite obvious. We've learned this already. You do a kometz, right? You take the kometz. You have a thought you're going to eat the shirayim tomorrow or burn the kometz tomorrow. Not only, right, it's pigul according to the Mishnah, and even Rabbi Yosi agrees. The Gemara is going to ask, why do we have to point out about Rabbi Yosi here? And really, it's building up for the next part, which is, what about lahaktir levona talamachal? What if you have a thought to burn the levona, the frankincense, tomorrow? Now, let's just talk again about the process. You take the dough, you put it in a klei sharet. Then, when it's in the klei sharet, you add the oil, you add the frankincense, then you bring it to the altar, you move the frankincense over to the side, you go into the part where there's the oil and the batter, the Kohen takes the kometz, not you, the Kohen takes the kometz out, then puts it in a sanctified vessel. Remember, also, this was in a sanctified vessel, puts that in a new sanctified vessel, and then burns it on the altar. And then takes the levona, the Kohen then gathers whatever levona is in there and takes and burns all the levona on the altar. Now, in order to permit the shirayim, you have to do both the kometz and the levona have to be burnt on the altar. So now the Mishnah says, if you have a thought lahaktir levonata lemachal, Rabbi Yosi omer pasul ve'en bo karet. He says, even though it's a pigul thought, and normally chutz lizmana is a problem, he says it's actually disqualified, but there is no karet. This isn't really pigul. Chachamim omrim, this is what the chart has. The Chachamim say, what do you mean? It's pigul. Okay, when you have a thought during the kmitza, now I didn't really stress this. You're having a thought that while you're kometz et mincha, okay, this goes back to the beginning of the Mishnah, you take the kometz, and while you're taking the kometz of the mincha, of the dough, you have a thought that you're going to burn the levona tomorrow. So Rabbi Yosi says that's not correct. We're going to have to wait till the Gemara to understand why. Reish Lakish is going to help us out on it. V'chachamim omrim pigul v'chayavim alav karet. Chachamim say, what do you mean? Both the pigul, both the kometz has to be burned and the frankincense has to be burned. So therefore, if you have a thought about the frankincense, of course, it disqualifies the korban, and it's karet. Remember, the karet is if you eat it. Amru lo, mashina zeh min hazevach. They said to Rabbi Yosi, why is this any different from a zevach? What happens in a zevach? You have a thought while you're sprinkling the blood of the animal that if you burn the imurim on the altar, now the imurim are not the blood, they're two different things, like the frankincense and the kometz. So why is it any different? Amar lahen. This is what I mean. It's very different. Hazevach damo b'saro v'imurav echad. The blood, the flesh, the imurim, that's all the same, right? Ulevona, so any thought while you're doing the blood about the meat or about the imurim, the fatty parts that you're going to burn on the altar, or the meat that's permitted to eat, that's all one and the same. It all comes from the same animal. Levona, the levona is a distinctly separate part of the mincha. Now, it's true you put it together, but it's separate. Obviously, the rabbis think because you put it together in one vessel, it's all kind of the same. But Rabbi Yosi doesn't think so. So the first question the Gemara asks is not yet what's Rabbi Yosi's position. First, they want to know, why do they have to tell us that Rabbi Yosi agrees in the classic case of pigul? So they say, really, they just brought that mishum de Abaye lemitne seifa la'aktir levonatan lemachal, Rabbi Yosi omer pasul ve'en bo karet. Well, they really wanted to tell you the next part, which is that Rabbi Yosi disagrees with the rabbis, which is the central part of the Mishnah. And he said, and Ma'u determina, you might have thought. Now, here we go. What might you have thought? And this is going to get into what's the reason for Rabbi Yosi. First, we're going to say what's not the reason for Rabbi Yosi. You might have thought that it's maybe because he holds ein mefaglim b'chatzi matir. Okay, this is something we saw in Zvachim, if you remember, that you can't, there's no pigul in a chetzi matir. What's a chetzi matir? Well, here we have two things that permit. We have the kmitza has to be burned and the levona has to be burned. So if you have a pigul thought in only half of the matir, half of the idea, if you remember, pigul is all about the matir, the idea, it's where you have a thought in the action that actually permits something else. So you might have thought that maybe that's what Rabbi Yosi holds, in which case, any case of a mincha is going to disagree. Because in every case of a mincha that you do, unless you have a pigul thought also when you're kometz the mincha and also when you take the levona. But if you have a pigul thought only when you're kometz the mincha, well, then you're not going to, that's a chatzi matir, and there is no pigul in a chatzi matir. So, okay, so you might have thought Fafilu Reisha Nami. Maybe he disagrees with the Reisha as well. Kamash Malan de Bahamod. Turning now to Amud Bet. That's to teach you, no, he actually agrees in this case. And it also, what they're really telling you is, and his theory is not the reason for his approach is not because of this law of ein mefaglin b'chatzi matir, that we don't consider things pigul if you only did it in part of the action that permits, right, part of the matir. Because here again, you have two things that permit the shirayim to be eaten. One is the burning of the levona, and one is the burning of the komets. And you only had the thought during one, so maybe, right, during the kmitza of the mincha, so maybe it wouldn't work to do pigul. No, he thinks a classic case it is. So now we're going to have to figure out, why does he think then, if you're komets the mincha with the thought that you're going to burn the levona tomorrow, that's not pigul. The only time it would be pigul, according to Rabbi Yosi, is if you're komets the mincha to burn the mincha tomorrow, but not to burn the frankincense. So laktir levona talam achar Rabbi Yosi and pasul ve'im bo kareit. That's just a quote from the Mishna. Amar Reish Lakish. Omer haya Rabbi Meir. Okay, what we're going to do here, you can see in the wording here, and then I'm going to actually stop sharing screen. But Reish Lakish says, he's going to give an explanation. Then we're going to question first his language he uses. We're going to answer it. Then we're going to have a difficulty on Reish Lakish and answer it. And then we're going to explain what's the approach of the rabbis. Okay? So, maybe I'll just leave it up for now anyway. So, I'm a Reish Lakish. Omer haya Rabbi Yosi, ein matir mefagel et matir. Okay? He says, the reason for Rabbi Yosi, I should have bolded it here anyway. I bolded it after. It doesn't matter. The reason for Rabbi Yosi is a matir is not mefagel another matir. In other words, you can't have a thought when you're komets the mincha, which is a matir, to burn the levona tomorrow, because the levona is also a matir. So one matir can't cause another matir to be pigul. So what they're really saying is the thought about the levona, okay? One second. Right, kigon akomets mo'elet lefagel matir ha'achir. Right, the levona. You can't have, while I'm doing one matir, which is the komets, taking out the komets, which permits me to burn the komets, can't cause another matir. I can't have a pigul thought about a different matir, about burning levona tomorrow. Okay, so then he says, "V'chein ata omer," and I'm going to say the same thing holds true. B'shnei b'zichei levona shalechem apanim, with the two bowls of frankincense that we use for the lechem apanim. Same thing. If you burn one and have a thought while you're burning one that you're going to burn the next one tomorrow, which is forbidden, it's not going to ruin it, because ein matir mefagel et matir, because they're both matirs. They're both permitting the lechem apanim to be eaten. So same thing. So first the Gemara asks, "My v'chein ata omer." Why do you have to add the b'zichei levona? What are you adding to that? Isn't it kind of obvious? To which they answer, well, not really. Ma'u detema, you might have thought, Tama de Rabbi Yosi belevona, mishum de lav mina de mincha. You could have said, wait a minute. When it comes to the mincha, there's two different things going on. There's a dough, and you take a bit of that and burn it. And there's a levona, and they're two completely different things. And that's why it doesn't work. Aval b'shnei b'zichei levona, de mina da adininu. But the two bowls of frankincense, so it's true, they're two separate bowls. And there's different frankincense in that one and that one. But they're the same type of item. They're both frankincense. So ema mefagle hadade. Maybe they will cause one to be the other to be pigul. Kamash malan. That's what Rabbi Yosi had to tell us. No. The shnei b'zichei levona of the lechem apanim are exactly the same. It's not because things are the same type, or they're not the same, right? The pigul only works when they're the same type, and it doesn't work when they're different. Because in this case, it's going to either even work when they're different, or even work. It's going to not be pigul according to him, not only when they're different, but even when they're the same in the lechem apanim case with the bowls of frankincense. But now, firstly, somewhat according to the way we just explained it, and just in general, we're going to ask a difficulty on Reish Lakish's explanation. Wait, is it really not the reason for Rabbi Yosi? And as according to this, it doesn't mean, it has nothing to do with which type of item. Is it frankincense and a dough, right? Or versus lavona, right? And lavona, frankincense and frankincense, which are the same. In other words, we're saying right now has nothing to do with that there are two different things: the frankincense and the dough, right? The komets, the kmitza. How can you say that that's not his reason? He says it explicitly. And it's Reish Lakish, it's very nice you gave this explanation, but it doesn't match at all what he says in the Mishnah. Hakatani Seifa. What does it say in the Seifa of the Mishnah? Let's go back. The rabbis say to him, why is this any different from the sacrifice? And what does he answer? Well, the zevach, the dam, the basar, the imurim, the blood, the flesh, the fatty parts, they're all the one and the same. Livona is not min mincha. He says explicitly, this is not part of the same thing as the mincha. In other words, it's an external thing that's added in. So that seems to say that's what causes it. The bizichei livona are actually the same. So the answer is, my eina min mincha, eina be'ikuv mincha. Ela ibai hai mikta beresha v'ibai hai mikta beresha. No, what he's saying is that the frankincense and the komets, it doesn't really matter which one you do first. Neither prevents the other from taking place. So because of that, what he says is lavona eina min mincha, what he means is this has no bearing on that one. These are two separate actions. One has no bearing on the other. So if you want to first burn the frankincense, you can. You want to first burn the kmitza, you can. Same exact thing with the b'zichei levona. They're exactly the same. You can decide to burn one or burn the other. It doesn't matter what order you do it in. Okay? So that's his explanation in the end of how you can explain it really is a matir mefagel et matir. That's his reason. And it applies both in the case of the b'zichei levona and in the case of the komets and the levona, because in either case, the matil is not mefagel another matir. And when he points out this part about it being different, he doesn't mean it's a different type of item. It means these two actions stand independently. And that's true for the b'zichei levona as well. Okay? That's his explanation. So now the Gemara has one last question. Okay, v'Rabbanan ki amrinan ein matir mefagel et matir. And again, we have some problems with the girsa. I'm going to go with what it says in my version, take out in parentheses. When they say ein matir mefagel et matir, now the assumption is they agree with this theory. So if they agree with this theory, then why do they disagree with him in the case of the levona? Right? Why do they say, right, that it's pigul and you're chayav karet hakometz temen kalak tir levonatam achal? If you say ein matir mefagel et matir, and these are two different matirim, so they says hanimile hechadilo ikavu bechad mana. When you say one matir is not mefagel another matir, he's saying that's when they don't both go into the same bowl. What's the example? So Rashi gives an example, kigon gabe kivtze atzeret, like the two kvasim that you bring on Shavuot, where we say demo de Rabbanit b'sefer de matnitin. Okay, and that's what's in parentheses actually. Shachad echad min hakvasim lechol mechavero lemachal da'amar shnehem kshirim. Why, when you slaughter one of the kvasim, is the other one, right? And you have a thought to eat from the other one tomorrow. That's not pigul. Why is that not pigul? Because each is collected. The blood of each is collected in a completely different bowl, and therefore they're separate. But here they're put in the same bowl. So hechad yikavu b'chad mana. Here, when they were put in the same bowl, right, where you put the frankincense in the same bowl as the dough, and then you take the komets out from there. So it's really considered one and the same. Okay, and that's why the rabbis actually say there is pigul. Okay, so what ends up in the end, they both agree that ein matir mefagel et matir, but that's when they're not put together. When they're put together, they can be. Okay, that's according to the rabbis in one vessel. Okay, I'm a Rabbi Yanai. And we're going to go on. Still, the study guide goes to this section as well, just not to the very end of today's daf when we get to the new Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yanai, likut levona bezar psula. So I said that the Kohen has to gather the levona after the komets is taken, gathers the levona and burns it on the altar. That is disqualified if a non-Kohen does it. So now we want to know the reason. That's what Rabbi Yanai says. My time. What's the reason? Amar Rabbi Yirmia mishum holacha naguba. He says it's because gathering the levona, let's say you're a non-Kohen, you gather it and you give it to a Kohen. That's basically like holacha. Now, even if you don't move and you just gather it and give it to the Kohen, you're getting it closer to the altar. So even without moving, it's like holacha. And once we say holacha, what did we learn? all the four avodot, which we're going to go through them soon. I'll show you on the sheet. Kometz, notem b'kli, right, to take the komets out, to put it in the vessel, to be molich, to walk it to the altar, and to be matir, to burn. All those are the four major actions. You do them with a machshava, shelo, right, pigul machshava, you're going to ruin it. So now, or any other thing you do, right, we're actually out of pigul here. Here we're talking about a Kohen has to do all the four actions, not a non-Kohen, right? This was different, we said, than slaughtering of an animal, even though the komets is like slaughtering. Slaughtering could be done by Azar, but not the komets. But that's not what's important. What's important is the holacha. Now, it comes from Yirmia, and he says, if you call this holacha, even though he's not moving his feet, this goes back to some machloket we saw in Svachim as well. Kasavar, he must hold on this side of the machloket, the holacha shelo b'regel shma holacha. The getting something closer to the altar without actually moving your feet is still called walking it, okay? It's actually hard to call it walking because, right, holacha is to pass it even, to get it closer without actually having to move your feet. And holacha bizar is psula. Once you call it holacha, holacha bizar is disqualified. Okay, that's Rabbi Yirmia. Comes Rabbi Mary. Next section of the Gemara is going to be Rabbi Mary's attempt to prove this. Okay, then we're going to have a difficulty proving, we're going to reject Rabbi Mary's proof, but right now we're going to do a few stages till we get to Rabbi Mary's proof. I'm a Rabbi Mary. Afana nami tanina. I'm going to prove what we just said, that it's holacha, and doing it by azar is pasul, and it's considered holacha, even if you don't move your feet. I'm going to show this from a Mishna. Why? Zeh haklal, kol hakometz v'notein b'kli v'hamolich. Okay, this is a Mishna on your bed, if you remember. This is the rule. If you're kometz, you do the kmitza, notem b'kli, put in the vessel, molich, do holacha and matir. Okay, it's with a pigul thought, it's disqualified. Bishlama kometz hainu shochet. So kometz, fine, that's parallel to shochet. Molich nami hainu molich. So molich is getting it there. Matir hainu zoreg. Burning it is like srikat dam. Okay, these are all parallel to the actions in the korban. But ela notem b'kli ma'ika avid. By the way, we had this exact sugya in Zvachim. Putting it in the kli, what have you done? What's that similar to? It's not, now I put here Kabbalah, but it's not exactly. If you would think it's Kabbalah, what's the problem? Midame, it's not exactly similar because hata mimela hakashakil v'rami. I mentioned this before, which is that Kabbalah is to accept the blood. The blood's coming out, you accept it. Notem b'kli is you're putting it into the vessel. That's very different, okay? One is it just happens, and the other is you take it and place it there. To which they say, no, Ella, so how could notem b'kli be similar to Kabbalah? Ella mishum dekevan delo sagele delo avedle avodah chashuvahi. We're going to say it's not really similar to Kabbalah. So what I put in this chart, not really true. It's not really because it's Kabbalah. It's because there's no other way to get you can't put the komets on the altar unless you put it in the klei sharet. So since there's no other way to do it, that must be an avodah chashuvah. And therefore, we're going to say, al korchech mishavela ke Kabbalah. We're going to put it up there as if it's Kabbalah because it's so necessary. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? We're going to learn from this too. Rabbi Yana said that likut levona bizar is pasul, is disqualified. Why? Hachinami, we'll say the same thing here. Kevan de lo sagele de lo avedle avodah de lo avedla. There's no other way to get the levona on the altar unless you collect it. It's right now at the top of that dough. You have to take it off. So therefore, it's avodah chashuvahi. Al korche mishavele ki holacha. So we're going to basically say that this is like holacha. The collecting, the levona must be like holacha, just like notem b'kli is like Kabbalah, because even though you're not actually moving it, but the only way to get it there is to move it like that, so it's like moving. Okay? And then we explained Rabbi Yana. Nice proof. Not really, because the Gemara is going to say, lo olam dedame le Kabbalah. It's actually more like Kabbalah. Okay? It's not really, okay, no, I'm sorry, right. So now we're going to say, we're going to go back. Not really, we're not questioning the levona, we're questioning the whole theory that leads to the levona. Because what was our theory? Our theory is notem b'kli is like Kabbalah, right? And then from there we got to, well, why can it be done by Azar? Because it's not really Kabbalah, but it's completely necessary. Same thing with the likut levona. It's completely necessary, So we're going to say it's like holacha, even if it's not really, and that's why it has to be done by a Kohen only. But now the Gemara is going to say, no, no, no. Forget that theory of it must be done and therefore it's an important avoda. No, we don't have such a thing. That's not true. There could be things that are super important, but we don't call them avodot. It really has to be, the likut levona has to be similar to one of these things, and it's not really holacha, because you're not really moving, you're just picking it up. So he's going to say the following. Why is noten b'kli like Kabbalah? Not because it has to be done. There's no other way to do it. L'olam dedami l'Kabbalah. It really is like Kabbalah. Why? Because you're putting in the vessel, just like you're putting the blood in the vessel. Now, you asked before, but there's a difference because that happens anyway. And this one you actually put in, and noten b'kli is not exactly the same as Kabbalah. In the end, it's all about sanctified vessels, right? In the end, you put it in a sanctified vessel. What's the difference? If you did it purposefully, right? Or I would say with an action, or it just kind of dripped there and you held the vessel. Either which way, you got it into the vessel and you sanctified the vessel. And that's why noten b'kli is like Kabbalah. But the levona, picking it up, is not the same as carrying it to the mizbeach, and therefore it doesn't prove Rabbi Yannai. Now, it's not to say this isn't true, it just doesn't prove Rabbi Yannai. Okay, that's the end of that Mishnah. Now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. For this, I didn't continue the study guide, we're just going to learn it without. Shachat shnei kvasim le'echol echat min hachalot lemachal. So going back, I mentioned before these two kivsei atzeret. We have these two sheep that we bring on Shavuot, and with them we bring 2 loaves of bread. Now, the bringing of the sacrifices permits the bread. So if while you're slaughtering one of the 2 kvasim to eat one of the chalot lemachar, you have a pigul thought while you're slaughtering probably even just one of them, to eat from the chalot tomorrow, or hiktir shnei bezichin le'echol echad min hastarim lemachar, right? So while you're slaughtering, let's just go with the simple reading. Sounds like you're slaughtering both animals, or you're burning both of the frankincense bowls, the frankincense from the bowls on the altar. You have a thought to eat one of the loaves of bread, right, from the lechem apanim tomorrow, or the loaves that go with the kivtzei atzeret tomorrow. Now, these all go together. Well, what are we going to say here? Rabbi Yosi omer, oto achala v'oto aseder shechishev alav, pigul v'chayavim alav karet. He says, look, that matir's that. So yes, if while you're doing the matir, you have a pigul thought to disqualify what is then permitted to eat, and you have a thought that you're going to eat it in the wrong time, it disqualifies that one. Vasheni pasul ve'ein bo karet. But if it's, let's say, the shtei alechem, so the one you had the thought about is disqualified, and it's karet if you eat it. But the other one is just disqualified, but there's no karet for it, okay? Because it's not pigul. And chachamim omrim zev pigul v'chayavim alav karet. It's all a package deal. If your thought is about one of the loaves, it ruins the other loaf as well. The other loaf becomes pigul just the same. So Amar Rav Huna. Now Rav Huna says, Omer haya Rabbi Yosi, pigel b'yerech shel yamin, v'lo nitpaga yarech shel smol. If you had a pigul thought about the right calf, it doesn't mess up the left calf. Okay, now we're moving to regular animals. You have pigul thought about the meat. I'm going to eat this limb tomorrow. Just that limb is a problem, not the other one. My timer. So, right, it's very similar to the Mishnah. The one that you piguled, that you messed up, is a problem. The other one is not. Either you could say logic, or you could prove it from a pasuk. Here's the logic. Lo adifa machshava mimaaseh tum'ah. Why should machshava be any worse than impurity? And what do we know about impurity? Ilu itam echad ever mi itam lekule. If you get one limb of the animal tameh, the rest of it is not tameh. It's just the meat that became tameh. Here's a pasuk. Okay, this is the famous pigul pasuk, right? In Vayikra Zayin, pasuk Yud Chet, it says, Vayikra Zayin, pasuk Yud Chet, Im ha'achel yachel mibsar zevach shlama v'yom hashlishi, right? If you eat on the 3rd day, lo yiratzeh will not be accepted, and makrivato lo yichashev lo pigul yiyeh, and from there they derive this whole pigul, even though it's not the simple reading. By the way, the din and daf is all about this pasuk. Okay, this week, all about this pasuk, how they took this pasuk out of its simple reading. Okay, fascinating topic. Worthwhile listen. Anyway, it says, how nefesh ha'ochelet mimenu avonatisa. So what are they darshan from this? Mimenu velo mechavero. If you eat from it always means not the whole thing, just the part that became disqualified. Okay, so we have logic and we have a pasuk. We're going to end with just the beginning of this question. We're not going to really understand the whole question yet. We're just going to start. So I don't not finish the daf, but we'll get close. Eitive Rav Nachman le Rav Huna. So now Rav Nachman comes and questions Rav Huna, who basically said that in the calf, right? Rabbi Yosi would say just the calf that you had thought about, not the other one. So he says, Rav Nachman says to Rav Huna, La'olam ein bo kavet ad shifagel b'shtehen b'kazayid, b'shtehen in be'echa mehem lo. Okay, the context of this, okay, this is, right, the context of this is, right, about the shtei alechem, okay? Now, he says there's a braita about the same thing about our Mishnah. There's not karet in one bread unless you have b'shtein b'kazayid. B'shtein in be'echa mehem lo. Okay, so now why does this contradict Rabbi Yosi? We don't really know yet, but the Gemara is going to say mani, or Rav Nachman is going to say ilema Rabbanan. If you're going to say it's the rabbi's position, afilu be'echat mehem nami, even one of them, it's not going to be ruined. In other words, what does this say here? Embo karet ad shifagel b'shtehen. Even if you're mafagel one of them, it's not going to be an issue. And therefore, they're going to say elapshita Rabbi Yosi. Okay, we're going to leave this and we're going to come back and start with this in next class, and we're going to understand exactly what this means and how it contradicts. So let's do a quick review of our daf. We started with this contradiction from the Mishnah, right? The inference from our Mishnah, to which we said, oh, well, maybe really our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore it doesn't contradict the previous Mishnah. Or maybe the inference that you thought is not the right inference. And then eventually actually and then it matches the rabbi's opinion. And then we eventually got to the point where we said, actually, there really is no inference. It's really just coming to teach the halacha itself. And you might have thought the halacha was obvious. No, it wasn't. And that we explained at the very end why it wasn't so obvious. Because maybe le'echolu la'aktir, a thought about eating something that's ra'oi, that could be eaten, and burning something that could be burned, maybe you would think they combine, because both are valid pigul thoughts. Again, it's hard to call them valid. They're completely invalid, but they would create a pigul each on their own, so maybe you could combine them, and that's what the Mishas tell you it's not. Then we move to the issue of the kometz, the levona, the whole machloket, about what if you have a thought while you're doing the kmitza that you're going to burn the levona in the wrong time. And then we had this question, do they combine, do they not combine? And then we really tried to figure out Rabbi Yosi's approach. He said they don't combine. How did that work? In the end, Reish Lakish from the beginning says it's really ein matir mefagel matir. And even though the rabbis agree with that, they say in this case that they were in the same vessel together, so they're really considered one. But according to Rabbi Yosi, they're really considered two separate things. And then we had to explain why he says it by the bezichei levona. Right? We thought at first it was two of the same. You need two of the same type. That's kind of what it sounded like in the language of the Mishna. But in the end, we changed that. And then we moved to Rabbi Yanai, who said that the collecting the levona in a zar is disqualified. Only a kohen can do it. And then we had to prove where he gets it from. Basically, we call it holacha. That's what Rabbi Yirmia said. And then Rabbi Meiri tried to prove it, but we showed that Rabbi Meiri's proof wasn't really so clear-cut and that you can't necessarily prove it from there. And then we got to the new Mishnah, which basically said that if you slaughter the two kvasim to eat one of the chalot the next day, right, then, or the bezichim to eat one of the starim tomorrow, then actually, according to Rabbi Yosi, just what you said pigul is about is the issue. And according to the rabbis, no, actually both are disqualified. Okay? And both are pigul. Okay, Rabbi Yosi actually said they're both disqualified, but he said only one is really pigul. And then Rav Huna had the halacha that also the same thing would be with the yerech shel yamin, one calf, it wouldn't necessarily mess up the other calf. And he proved it from a pasuk and from logic. And then we're going to have this difficulty, which we really kind of just started, but we'll get into next time, that Rav Nachman raises to Rav Huna, and we'll see what happens with that. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shabbat Tov.